over the last few years, there has been a spate of TV shows based around comic books and using comic book properties. And sort of in parallel in relation to what's happened with movies, where there have been so many movies where they've developed certain comics properties and adapted them and translated them to the film world. So you would think that this should be heaven for someone like me, someone who's been a lifelong comic reader, who particularly likes some of the characters and some of the stories that in theory they're translating to the not the bigger screen, but the smaller screen, as it were, in terms of television. But actually, most of them suck. Most of them I do not enjoy in any way, not unlike the fact that I don't enjoy most of the movies that she made around this. And in fact, part of the reason why these are being made, in terms of movies and TV shows, and why they are popular and why they make money, but why someone like I doesn't like them, someone like me doesn't like them, is similar, which is that they're appealing to an entirely different demographic than the hardcore fan who read the comics and who enjoyed what the comics were about and what the comics medium was about. So part of the problem is that the TV shows suck in a very different way to the movies. I mean, I'll probably make a video about why I think most comic movies suck in their own right, but it's a totally different topic right now. So the main reason, as the title suggests, as the topic suggests, as to why TV shows based on comic books suck and just are not appealing to me personally, is because ultimately they are just soap operas, but reskinned with the characters, the universe, and the themes of a specific comic book. Other than that, take those away, and it's just a soap opera, as you've seen for decades and decades on television, as always seemed to gain some level of following and get some interest in the random demographic that you get for television. I shouldn't say random there, probably. Whoever it is, I obviously don't know what the demographic breakdown is for these shows. And as a result, seem to have some success. But as a result, take away the themes and the characters, aren't shows that I'd want to watch, aren't shows that appeal to me or unfold in a way that's enjoyable for me. So these shows, if you were to summarize the formula of how they work, they're a reskin of a soap opera, which are generally driven around what you could call, I mean, this is a term that they use for a lot of TV shows that were sci-fi shows, monster of the week style. So what they mean by that is like, one thing that appears that one week, that they battle that one week, that's a smaller task, which that's how most of the episodes is taken up. But then with a bigger overarching plot, which tends to be the more appealing and the more interesting one, and if it was a comic book, that would be the plot that you'd tell within the big arc with the really good writer. But instead, this is spread across the whole show. So whether that's 10 episodes or 22 episodes or whatever it might be, that's just spread out. And that's the more appealing one, but it tends to be drip-fed to you, a tiny little bit at the beginning or the end of an episode. And anytime you get a big element of that, you want to watch it. But you don't get a lot of it, and there's very rarely episodes entirely about it, except maybe the finale, or now with this new trend with like the Game of Thrones and Westworld style, like it's the second to last episode, it's the penultimate episode, which is the one that has a lot of the reveals in. So the Monster of the Week aspect, I mean, a great show as an example of this is something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or if you want to use really where Monster of the Week mainly came from, it's mainly the X-Files, right? A show where there's the day-to-day aspect of the small case that they're solving or the small monster they're battling. The difference is those shows in general did it better. I mean, the X-Files particularly much better because each of the episodes within that, because it was taking on almost a Twilight Zone element to it of different aspects each week, that would be interesting in its own right. The problem is these smaller quests tend to be where a lot of the soap opera element come in these TV shows, and as a result aren't that interesting to me. I mean, they weren't that interesting to me in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I thought they weren't as well done in that show either. Anytime, and this is what's very frustrating about these shows and why I just don't watch them anymore, anytime you do get a big dose of the overarching plot, the one that you really want to know about, the one that has the really interesting villain or the characters or some real progression from the protagonist, anytime this comes along and you get a big dose of it, there's a formula where you almost know that the next episode, if not the next couple of episodes, will bring you way back down to the everyday level, from the big mythic level that you're on there, to a day-to-day, everyday thing, usually bringing the tone down to become a lot more throwaway and bring the energy and the pacing down to be like, oh, just another day. I mean, a great example of this, in terms of not actually a comic book TV show, but it was actually an anime, would be the show Naruto. So the actual overarching plot of Naruto can be quite compelling, and some of the things there really do hit on mythic resonances and are interesting. But the big problem with that show is it has so much filler, it is criminal. And so when you get one of these great big plot points where like Orochimaru, that guy would be like fucking with Sasuke or whatever, The problem is, on the next episode, when you finish that one, you want to watch more of that, right? No. Next one, they're going to come in with that annoying-ass music that's like the equivalent of the game music where you're just in the town somewhere like, just some little, like, normal, and as soon as you hear that music, you know you fucked. It's an everyday one, and he's just going to get some little side quest that he's going to go and do that has fuck all to do with the overarching plot. And you just feel like you're just wasting my time now. I don't want to watch this show of just an everyday life of a kid. That's not an interesting show to me. So Naruto's a great example of it. I thought Jessica Jones was a great example recently of this happening, where the main plot with the purple guy was interesting. Everything else, fairly humdrum, fairly mundane, fairly boring. Nothing like a good comic book episode, really. And in terms of a non-comics but Western show that I think is a good example again of a reskin is The Mentalist. So the main character of The Mentalist is fantastic. Some of the main overarching elements are really interesting. If it was a show where he was constantly battling these bigger figures and the Red John character, yeah, that would be great. Problem is, the day-to-day stuff, yeah, it survives on the charisma of the actor, but the actual day-to-day cases often weren't that good, and they were incredibly formulaic, and you could really guess who the villain was, 5 minutes into the episode based on which characters he'd been introduced to, or who the fuck the guest star was, because that guy's not just going to be in it for 1 minute, is he, and then go away. So these are shows which have all been popular and all successful, and some people love them, but they fit this model, and that's something I don't like about it, and it's something I've broken down and seen the formula behind, and now I kind of know which shows to give a pass to. So this is certainly a problem, as you can see from those examples, for more than just comic book TV shows. But it's particularly bad for comic book TV shows because what's drawing you into the show is not that you watched it, it's good. It's that you like the characters or you like the premise, and therefore, as a result, you think the show is going to be really good, and then you're let down. So it is typical at the moment for most TV shows. This kind of formula, and this is just kind of the way these shows are even created and run and produced. One of the issues I have with it is you can only really tolerate them, from my perspective, if you're someone like me, if you really like the character. If there's something about the character that's so compelling, you can get through the everyday stuff to get to those bigger points. If you can't, it's just going to be a massive waste of your time in terms of how much of the show is actually enjoyable and how much is just waiting to get to that point in time, how much is spinning your wheels. So, yeah, I really enjoy the character of Superman, as many people may know. I mean, I guess they might not, because nowadays I guess most people wouldn't know. We don't really have icons on a lot of websites, but I famously used a lot of Superman iconography earlier in my career for a lot of the different places. So it's a character I've always enjoyed, it's a mythos that I've always connected with. So as a result, I could watch Superman, The New Adventures of Superman, the one from the 90s, with Dean Cain. And Terry Hatcher. Straight fire Terry Hatcher. I could watch Smallville, even though Smallville was a much worse show. And if what's funny is, in a way, I think Smallville almost gets away with the drama element, the soap opera element more, because it was also based around the life of a teenage boy in America. So that life would be more drama-filled and would be more predicated on small day-to-day bullshit than a main show. My problem is when they take a fantastic comic book concept and characters and just put them into this world and then force them through the kind of the cookie cutter approach of it's just going to be a formulaic TV show, even though they could do so much more with it and make it some sort of incredible Westworld, Game of Thrones-esque series that you think would be incredible, but they don't do any of that stuff. So I have to say, in this sense, when I say you have to really like the character, it also reminds me of the fact that, as a trend, I've found, if you're going to eat either catered food or some cheap, quick and easy, just buy and instantly eat it type of food, you have to really like that type of food. And the reason why I say that is because there's certain types of food that, in general, I don't particularly like. But if I went to someone's house who's a very good cook, or I went to a really high-level restaurant, I might like it, actually, because they're going to cook it so well, they're going to get all the flavors so in balance, it's going to be such high-quality ingredients and so fresh and so well put together that now I might enjoy it. But the point is, the very simple, very basic version, it's just going on the fact that you like it so much, you'll even have a shittier version with less quality, much quicker in terms of how it's cooked, less substance to it in that particular sense, and so you'll still be able to somehow enjoy some element of it. You're not as much of it, but some taste there will still hold you, but it wouldn't someone like me who doesn't like that thing. That's how I feel like these shows are. So yeah, I understand this is probably an issue with how TV works, because something like Game of Thrones, something like Westworld has an incredible budget. They've really gone all out on those shows, and they're banking on those shows being big. So I get that that's the way you're going to make an everyday TV show that's just filling up the schedule. And you know what? Maybe this is also how they think you get the female element, because obviously a lot of women enjoy soap operas and that sort of a show. But, and in fact, in general, seem to like TV shows like that more so than the plot-driven ones that I'm talking about. But personally, I would say even that's a little bit condescending, because if some of these shows are, I mean, the properties are as good as I know they are in the comic, I actually think women would enjoy them in the same way they enjoy Game of Thrones, they enjoy Westworld, they enjoy fantastic movies. It's not like it's only men going and seeing those. So I think it's a bit condescending to even think that you have to do that to appeal to women. So my problem is, yeah, it does just render what otherwise would be fantastic concepts and characters as just a reskins. It's just like any other show, but instead you've got, well, what's your favourite flavour? I like Superman. Is a Superman soap opera? Well, I mean, I'd rather have a Superman show. No, Superman soap opera. Who do you like? Batman. Oh, there's a Gotham. There we go. That's just Batman City, right? There's a Gotham soap opera. Enjoy it. Who enjoys soap operas? If you enjoy soap operas, have at it. I don't personally, though. So another aspect of it that is really annoying to me is that, okay, yes, comics themselves do have not a week-to-week formula, because obviously it's month-to-month. They do have a low-level aspect where you just fight smaller people, etc. But the best comics aren't like that. The best comics are epic. They are huge story arcs. They are incredible mythic-level stories playing out. The soap opera element in even the monthly comics, except for the whack ones written by like hack social justice warriors recently, they aren't really, there's not a lot of soap opera element at present, actually. There's not really a lot of it. That's only ever in there to slightly develop some of the character before they're then put into interesting situations again and battling certain odds or trying to solve certain puzzles. The stories in general are much more meaningful, go somewhere, and especially the arcs, because the arcs tend to be based on the writer, absolutely have an element to it. It's not just this is a story and it's meaningless and it's thrown away. They build into something and they have a meaning to them that a lot of these episodes of these shows don't have. Now, one of the problems with these shows and why you'll be burned so many times until you figure out this sort of a formula is that, much like with anime, this is the most criminal element, I think, but these shows especially live up to the same level of low quality and bang for buck, is that fans of these shows way overhype them. And so fans of these sorts of shows will tell you that there are like 20 good comic book TV shows. I've always said this, okay? The biggest enemy of any genre, in terms of getting new people into it, is the hardcore fan of the genre. Because since they like everything, and everything on certain different scales, because it's their life, they seem to think they like it all, it's all fantastic, they don't know how to figure out what you would like, how to take themselves out of it and their own weird idiosyncrasies and things that they just like but aren't actually necessarily fantastic. They don't know how to filter all that and then find the things that are really solid and super good and have a lot of inherent value in them that you would also enjoy, especially if they knew your personality. They don't know how to do that. So as a result, they'll turn people off things like anime and comics and all the rest of it and death metal music or whatever, because they'll just list you off 5 things that you have to be super into the genre to enjoy, instead of picking those few things that are exceptional and stand above the genre. Like when I did my video about Alan Moore, if you don't like comics as a medium, or you haven't in the past, and you don't enjoy just every day, just a stupid Batman comic, difference is if you read Watchmen, you might enjoy that if you just happen to enjoy great literature. It's totally different. The fact that it's in the comics medium, it's not defined by the genres of comics. So they aren't able to do that, fans, and that's why you'll get burned by so many of these shows. And as a result, if there was a good one, you'll probably miss it because so many of them are so crap. Now, there have been a whole bunch of them in recent times, which I think especially missed the mark. Like a recent one, okay, is, I mean, it hasn't played out that much, so I won't be too harsh, is Preacher. And the reason why I say this isn't such a great idea for a comic, this one is trying a bit harder than some of the other ones. The problem I have with it is, conceptually, I can't really see how they're going to be able to do most of the extreme stuff from the book. And the extreme stuff from the book and the shock value and the fact that that's what created like a lurking sense of dread or fear or a raw brutality to the world, that you knew insanely fucked up shit could happen, that can't really be present in the TV show, unfortunately. And so you can feel as though they're going to have to steer away from some of those elements. I also think, unfortunately, they haven't gone, the reason it isn't going to be on a Westworld Game of Thrones level is they also haven't cast fantastic actors, especially if you could get some TV actors. Like, one of the things that carried Westworld, some of the aspects of that show weren't as great in the story, but it got carried by the fact that Anthony Hopkins and Ed Harris in it, who were very good movie actors, particularly Anthony Hopkins. They don't have anyone of that caliber, unfortunately, in Preacher so far. So that's one that's like iffy, but it hasn't lived up to the billing of what the book was, which should have been a Game of Thrones type level production if you're going to do it. A really bad example, or a good example of how bad this is, and one that hasn't done well, is Constantine. Because, I mean, yeah, this is better than the movie. The movie is terrible if you know the comic, because it is nothing like the comic in any sense. The problem with Constantine is, what makes it a failure is 2 things. One, they didn't capture that, I mean, again, as we all know from my other concepts about adaptation, you can do things differently if you do them good in a different sense. This is where you've done things differently, almost for no good reason, and you haven't added anything, and you've just made the story worse. So one of the things about Constantine is it's about Britishness. It's about being British, and that's a big aspect of the identity of the character, which they've missed completely. It's also about the fact that the main character, whoever plays them, has to be incredibly charismatic, because almost the joke of Constantine is, yeah, he's doing magic and spells and the occult and all that stuff, which obviously is much more than actual real occult, because you're doing actual, demons are appearing in front of you, you're doing all this stuff. But you have to understand, the joke of Constantine almost, this is what people like Garth Ennis figured out, was really that his ultimate magic is almost the gift of the gab. It's the ability to talk to people and to manipulate them in action. If you know anything about hypnosis and Richard Bandler and NLP, that is really a key element of what you might call magic. It's transforming symbols from your mind into other people's minds and affecting their behavior or how they perceive you. That's a key element of it, right? So they haven't really nailed that aspect at all. They've just got an okay guy who's just trying to play that character. What's funny is this is a show that should have a guy like the guy who's fucking the Thomas Jane guy out of Mentalist should be this sort of a character. He would be charismatic. He'd be able to pull it off. You'd be able to watch him in that particular sense. They haven't managed to nail that aspect. And also, the boundaries of this show are way too closed in. The problem, again, is the comic, again, can go to insane levels. He can go to hell and battle with the devils. He can go over here and experience voodoo and all that. They make it much more on the rails and boxed in than something that Constantine should be, and why Constantine is a fantastic modern pulp-type comic. Lucifer, I think, is a really egregious example, because this is a show where, again, the main character for this one has to be incredibly charismatic, but in a very unique sense. If you read the books, what's great about that character is he absolutely is an anti-hero, and the way he's put together is part of what carries the book and makes it so interesting. And that first Mike Carey run is obviously a classic in comics. I think Jessica Jones was very overhyped. Like, I only thought the Purple Man story arc was the interesting one. And even then, the way they drew it out and tried to force it into some sort of like rape narrative, which almost felt very social justice warrior-esque, was kind of a bit lame, I thought, ultimately. And like that wasn't really, it pretended to be on a high level, but then actually was very much just about people's feelings and memory and, oh, what a bad experience and trauma. And like, that wasn't actually so cool, even the way that played out. So I actually thought that was a very overhyped show. So there haven't been many of these shows that I've enjoyed, and yet I should be, in theory, a core aspect of the demographic, right? But as you're seeing, the reason why comic books are getting big in mainstream in TV shows and movies, and the reason why video games are getting big in mainstream is because they've dumbed them down, watered them down, and made them something that the mainstream already want, that's already formulaic to fit the mainstream. They're not the thing that the original hardcore player really loved because they were so unique and so hardcore and so intense and so niche. They're not in that sense. And that's not like some old man grumbling. I'm just saying this is why I don't enjoy these things. And unfortunately, once the formula reveals itself, it's very easy to see what things you aren't going to enjoy aside from that.